Hello, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces, but also great to see a lot of new faces as well here today for our event. I'm Kelly Griffith, and I am very proud to be the executive sponsor for the Safeway African American Leadership Network. When I'm not doing that, I'm the executive vice president of retail operations for Safeway, and I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm very proud to serve as the executive sponsor for the Safeway African American Leadership Network and to be able to work with Tim Williams, who is our chair, and everyone also in the network group, and helping them with their mission. And I thought I would read their mission statement our mission statement, because I think it really connects well with our great event today. So it's providing a safe forum to explore issues facing African American employees, support company initiatives, and improve cultural awareness by promoting the personal and professional growth, leadership, and development of African Americans at Safeway, and effective communications and relationships between Safeway and African American employees, consumers, suppliers, and communities. I really want to thank everyone again for attending our event today. Combined Destinies is an event today to recognize Black History Month. And as we know, Black History Month celebrates African Americans' contributions to American history, which recognizes the accomplishments of African Americans throughout the United States. Today's event, Combined Destinies, sheds light on how we can all embrace diversity so we can continue to grow as a society. Black History Month celebrates African Americans' contributions to American history, which recognizes the accomplishments of African Americans throughout the United States. Today, our event, Combined Destinies, sheds light on how we can all embrace diversity so we can all grow. And today, we have a couple of very special guests to help us with that, and they're going to share their story and their book on how it can create lasting change by opening hearts and as well as minds. I'm nearly completed with the book, and you'll hear more about that. And I encourage everybody to read the book that we'll talk about today, because it really, if you read the foreword, there are some comments from the authors about it's intended to open up hearts as well as minds. And I can tell you the 52 stories that are in the book, I'm through about 30 of them, and each one pulls at your heartstrings and your emotions in a different way. But you really, really have a strong sense on how we as Americans all need to come together and embrace each other to improve society. To get started, though, I want to introduce our chairperson of the SAALN group, Tim Williams. And when he's not being their chairperson, he is our corporate director of diversity affairs. And Tim, I know we have some other members of the board here, and I'm sure you'll want to introduce them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. I think I'm all right. Am I on? No. I'm going to talk. There we go. I think it's voice activated, right? My voice is too low. Okay. So I was supposed to memorize my entire speech, but that just took too much time, so just don't mind if I just read from my notes here. So first I wanted to welcome our invited guests. I think we have some members of Diablo Black Men's Group here. Thank you for coming. I know we have a couple folks from Clorox here, and I know Irby Foster, I thought you had your own badge now because I see you here quite often. So yeah, good to see you again. I think I saw on the list some friends from California State University of Monterey. Anyone here from there? Okay, so we had some folks who were your guests, right? So are they coming? They're here?
They're just not from CSUMB.
Oh, they're not? Tushimoto's?
Yeah.
Tushimoto's here? All right, okay, good. I mentioned Tushimoto specifically because you may know Steve Tushimoto works here at Safeway, and his dad, Bob Tushimoto, was a longtime Safeway employee. I think we used to do store audits together. I'll just say a very long time ago, as to not disclose my age. um, in addition, I think we also have someone from Center for Talent Innovation. Thank you for coming as well. So we always like to recognize our extra folks who come in and watch one of our shows. As Kelly mentioned, I do have my SAALN team here, and I think let's acknowledge them at the end and make sure the presentation goes smoothly first before they raise their hand. So the topic today that we're talking about is race. That's always like a scary topic in today's society. As you know, if you think about different subject matters in the area of race, think about like on the news, things of race and recently something that's going on with the LGBT community in Arizona. Just all these topics are very sensitive topics. And because of that, it often makes it that it makes for sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And we're talking about how do we get past that level where the conversations get to a level of comfort so we can go further along the way. And I'll tell you a personal story. I grew up in an all African American neighborhood for the most part. I went to a predominantly all white high school. And after about a month at school, one of the white, Caucasian, whatever word we're comfortable with here, right, said, Tim, can I touch your hair? And I was like, sure, go ahead. So he touched my hair and then he says, wow, it's soft. He had no idea. It was his first experience. The next day, here comes someone else, Joe Polizzi, good friend of mine. Joe said, Tim, you let George touch your hair. Let me touch your hair. So Joe touched it and Joe looked at George. It is soft. It was a big breaking point in our relationship as friends because it broke down some barriers and some walls of silence that at that point in time they always wanted to know, but it was somewhat uncomfortable to ask the question. And so, because of that, we're friends to this day, even 2 years as I'm out of high school, give or take. So today we're going to have some wonderful speakers who are much more experts in this subject matter than I am and ever will be probably. And the two individuals, let me introduce the first person who's going to be speaking. Her name is Ann Todd Jealous. Ann Todd Jealous' interest in human rights began at the age of 13 when she was a member of the first group of students to desegregate a previously all-white public high school for girls in Baltimore. Ann is a psychotherapist with nearly 30 years of work experience in psychotherapy and diversity training. She is the co-founder of the National Coalition Building Institute's Monterey chapter. She currently serves as board chair of the Village Project, Inc., a family counseling and tutorial agency created to serve the underserved population in the Monterey Peninsula. And if the last name sounds a little bit familiar, I think they say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Ann's son is Benjamin Todd Jealous, the former president and CEO of the NAACP, the nation's oldest and most widely recognized and respected civil rights organization. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ann Todd Jealous. Okay. Our next speaker, presenter, author extraordinaire is Caroline T. Haskell. Caroline is the founding director of let's do this part first. Caroline has committed to unlearning her racist condition and actively practices being an ally to people of color. And we say racist conditioning, again, we're going to get to a comfort level so you understand what that means. It's not an attack on anyone along the way. It's something that we just have to have more discussion on. So let's go into a little bit more about Caroline, sorry. Caroline is the founding director of the Personal Growth and Counseling Center and currently oversees all of health and wellness services at the California State University, Monterey Bay. She is the campus affiliate director of the National Coalition Building Institute an international organization whose mission is dedicated to elimination of racism and other forms of oppression. Caroline brings over 25 years experience providing program development and the management, clinical and counseling services and programs. Please help me in welcoming Caroline. Good to see you. Now my part's almost done, so you guys are almost done with me, so just hang in there just for another minute. The last person that I'm going to introduce is actually going to be our moderator. Our moderator is Tom Brown. Tom actually is a 26-year Safeway veteran. Let's see what we have up there for Tom. He's a bagger, assistant manager, checker. He's currently VP of Retail Initiatives and Labor. He's the executive sponsor for our Gen Now networking group. He's passionate about building people who can then have an impact on their community and reach the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Tom, currently, what are you right now, Tom? What's your title? The GVP of Retail Strategy and Communication? Tom just does big things. Please join me in welcoming Tom Brown.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. We could probably do a presentation just on how you desegregate a high school. When I saw that, I was like, wow, we could take the hour to just talk through that. So our first quote on the screen you see is, "We weren't born turning our backs on one another. Somewhere along the way we were taught." And so I think this is a very powerful image. When I first saw it, I said, that must be me as a child, and that must be my wife on the other side, because I'm African American and my wife is Caucasian. And so that looks like the two of us in that picture right there. And so we are, I think, blessed and fortunate to have two wonderful ladies in our presence today. You're in for a treat. I'm excited about what they have to offer. This really encourages us to self-examine ourselves, and it's a play on what we're compassionate about. And so I would just say, to kind of set the tone of the next 45 minutes, is to really get your mind and your heart prepared to receive some information. Try to block out old paradigms, misconceptions that you may have heard in the past, and try to really just focus in on listening on what these two co-authors have to present to us today. And so I'll move into the first question. How did you decide to write about the book?
Well, I thought about this book probably 18 years before I began to write it. I was working as a psychotherapist, and I had most of my clients were white. I live in a predominantly white community, and I had many who had a lot of grief about racism, came to me with a lot of frozen pain, really, about childhood experiences they had not healed from, or about adolescent friendships that were broken, or adult relationships that were destroyed because of bigotry, and a lot of pain. So that's when the idea first started, but I didn't have time to do it. And then when I retired my practice, I went to a high school reunion, and one of the white former classmates, came over to me and talked about an experience that she had had with me when we were in high school that had, she said, changed her life. And I want to read just one, because we want to read to you a little bit from Combined Destinies today. I don't just want to talk. I want to read to you what I wrote about the ending of that conversation. Later, as I reflected on that brief conversation and on that afternoon's program, it occurred to me that my white schoolmates had also been hurt by the racism that created intense separation and the restriction of cross-racial friendships to school grounds, because we were not allowed to be friends other than in school at that time. The parents were still picketing to get us out, actually. Also deprived them of the richness that cultural diversity brings to relationships. I wondered how the shame and guilt others may have carried, other than this woman who said she had some shame and guilt. I wondered how the shame and guilt others may have carried because of racist words and behaviors had affected their lives. Perhaps as adolescents, some of them had also been confused by the double standards that once removed from the constraints of bigotry made no sense. The distress of the adults in our lives, our teachers, counselors, parents, and their inability to help any of us effectively deal with the physical and emotional situations we were in was largely a consequence of the lack of racial diversity in their own lives and the ignorance and fear that come from living with sameness. So at that moment, I thought, it's time. You know, I do have time. I've just retired my practice. I have time to write, and this book needs to be written. I also am in an interracial marriage that began at a time when it was illegal in my home state to marry. We've been married for 47 years now.
Congratulations.
And my husband has tremendous pain over racism. I think those three things came together to begin this book. And then after doing lots of research to find out if there was any other collection of voices, of white voices, in print. And I could not find a book, individual memoir, but no collection.
Right.
Then it seemed absolutely essential that we begin this conversation.
Wow.
So
how did the two of you come together to collaborate to write this piece?
So I'm a longtime friend of Ann's, and she was talking about wanting to do this book. And I said, well, I want to write. I want to contribute. So I knew from the beginning of Ann talking about this that I was going to write some of my stories. But one day, a few months into the serious starting of the project, Ann called me and she said, can you come over? I said, sure. So I came to her house and she said, I really want you to do this project with me. And I think it was the emotional reaction I had to her saying that was just this floodgate of excitement, but also, you know, scared, nervous, all of that. And I thought, oh, the answer has to be yes. So I said, yes, Ann, I will. And we have been on this journey together. And I also think it's important to do this type of work together. I think Kelly was talking about there's a lot of hope in this message. And I think Ann and I, we share that together. Yeah.
Excellent. So whenever I pick out a book, the first thing you look at is the title. So how did you come up with the title of the book?
Actually, I was driving and I had a napkin in my glove compartment, and Martin Luther King's speech was on. And we had been working on the book together, but we had not titled it. We had working titles, but no title. And I heard his statement about his clarity that we were all in this together, and it was evidenced by everybody being there for this march, and that our destinies were tied together. And I pulled over and grabbed the napkin and wrote down Combined Destinies. And then I thought, we've got to have a verb and a title.
Sure.
What are you doing with Combined Destinies? And these stories were sharing their grief. So I put Combined Destinies, white sharing grief about racism, and then called Caroline and said, I think we have a title. And she liked it, and that was that.
So when did you start and when did you complete the book?
I started in September 2009.
Okay.
In January 2010 was when I realized that I couldn't do it alone, and I didn't want to do it alone, and I probably should not do it alone. So that's when I invited her in. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to watch a movie clip pretty soon, and in this clip, it's from the movie The Help, and the scene I think ties directly to chapter 1 in your book, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take a look at the clip, and then I'm going to ask our ladies a couple questions concerning the clip. So let's roll the clip.
Don't go, baby.
Baby, you need to get back to bed.
Please don't leave.
I got to, baby. I am so sorry.
Are you going to take care of another little girl?
No, that's not the reason. I don't want to leave you. But it's time for me to retire. You're my last little girl.
No!
Baby. I need you to remember everything I told you, okay?
Okay.
You remember what I told you?
You were kind. You were smart. You were important.
That's right, baby girl.
Don't go, baby.
I got to, baby. You give my sweet girl a chance. May Mobley was my last baby. In just 10 minutes, the only life I knew was done. God says we need to love our enemies. They're hard to do. But it can start by telling the truth. No one had ever asked me what it felt like to be me. Once I told the truth about that, I felt free.
So can you tell us a little bit about the clip and how it connects to?
Yes, actually, the book was I think it was at the publisher when the help came out. But May Mobley, this child that's in this clip, could have been one of my clients. And when I said that 18 years ago, the idea came that we have to have this out. I had a woman come to me as a client who was in her late 40s, and she had been cared for by an African-American woman from the time of her birth until one day when she came home from school. She was 11 or 12 years old, and the woman was gone. And the woman was there when she woke up in the morning. She was there when she went to bed at night. She went home to her own family after that, but this child didn't know that. I mean, as far as she was concerned, she was her mother because she was also the only person in the family who nurtured her. And she came home from school, and the woman was gone. No one had said she was going to leave. No one said why she was leaving. No one said where she went. And she couldn't cry because at that time, in the state in which she lived, little white girls did not cry over black women. And so there was no space for her grief. And so when she came to me, had been frozen for all of that time, and she had spent many years looking for this woman, whom she eventually found, actually, in California, which was interesting. But her pain was so severe, and my work with her was so deep, that day I said to God, I guess this voice has to be out there. People are not having this conversation. I know that every American is impacted by racism, and every American does not realize it. And this is one way in which many Americans are being impacted. She's not alone. So that's a connection. When I look at May Mobley, I remember her and her story, actually, because she gave me permission to use her story in any way I wanted, is the first one in the book. There's a first chapter deals with separating from caregivers and the pain of that. And so that's a connection.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what you see on the screen now are the chapters of the book. I wish we had the whole afternoon to go through each chapter, but I wanted our panelists to just speak to what are some of the common themes that weave throughout the book, just for our audience.
So I think really the first part of our work was living with the stories, really just reading them, rereading them, thinking about them. And while some of the stories could probably have gone in some different chapters, some overarching themes really started to emerge. And Anne was just mentioning one of the biggest ways in which white people and people of color have been white people have been impacted is their separation from people of color. And so there's 3 chapters, and it really deals with different developmental stages in somebody's life. So obviously the separation from caregivers. There's a chapter 4, which is a separation during childhood or adolescence, typically messages from the parents that have impacted the developing teens' ability to really sustain a friendship across racial lines. And then the chapter 7, which is separation from people in our adult lives. So it could be our lovers, it could be acquaintances, it could be friends. So separation is a huge theme throughout the book. There's a chapter on sameness. What happens when you grow up around people who look like you and you don't have any sort of cultural diversity? What does that do to us?
Right.
And then 2 really emotional chapters, guilt and shame, because both of those are products of what happens when we don't know a lot about other people, and perhaps we need to. And probably the most important chapter, and Ann and I were curious about how it fell out. The longest chapter is chapter 8, and it's really around resistance and freedom, because for many of us who are white, we have made attempts at really resisting the conditioning that is everywhere around us. And we're doing a lot of talking in that chapter about, so how do we free ourselves? What do we have to do?
So in essence of time, we, or the authors of the book, have chosen chapter 6, which is the chapter on silence. And so I think I read some of the chapter last night, and it's a powerful chapter because I think a lot of us walk around in silence, and we are emotionally wounded and we're spiritually wounded, and we don't even know it, which can be scary. And so my question is, why did you pick chapter 6 on silence?
But we have limited time today, and we're trying to find a chapter that would address all the issues. And really, if there were no silence about racism, the other chapters wouldn't be necessary.
Right.
Okay, because if we were all talking honestly about the impact of this evil thing on all Americans, then we would be coming together. So there wouldn't be any separation. If we were coming together, then there wouldn't be heavy shame and guilt being carried around. If we were coming together, we wouldn't have a need for resistance, because there wouldn't be anything to resist, because we would know each other, we would be connected to each other. We would recognize the bond, or as Martin Luther King said, he had a wonderful quote I love, which was, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And we are, in fact, in the same boat. And we need to see each other and talk to each other. So it's a very important piece.
Well, that's a perfect segue. Let's transition. We're going to actually read some of the excerpts out of chapter 6. So I'm going to ask our panelists to head over to the podium, because chapter 6 is a great chapter. I read some of it again last night, and so press in and listen, because it's some good stuff, and it's going to encourage you to want to read the rest of the book.
Seeing what is invisible and naming it is extremely difficult. One of the ways in which white Americans have been damaged by racism is the conditioning to be blind to ways in which they benefit from the current political and economic system. When conversations about race take place in groups that are racially diverse, white people often feel personally blamed for racism. They then become defensive, hearing verbal exchange as a personal attack rather than a conversation about a system that we all share. Caroline relates some of her observations about facilitating dialogues on race in a university setting.
I have been teaching courses on diversity, multiculturalism, and oppression for 20 years. I have had the opportunity to witness behavior that is conditioned and repetitive, particularly among white people. Recently, on the first day of teaching a 2-day course for university faculty and staff with my colleague, an African-American woman, we facilitated an emotionally charged conversation about race relationships in the United States. That type of conversation happens often as we work with a group of people from different backgrounds in dynamic study of content related to diversity. On the second day of training, one of the white trainees shared her fear of participating in the heated conversation that had occurred on the previous day. Because of her discomfort with the verbal interactions, she made the decision to keep her mouth shut. She said, for fear that a person of color would get upset with what she said. I let her know of my appreciation for her willingness to speak up and her honesty in letting the group know what had been going on for her during the time when she had chosen to remain silent. I then asked her if she was willing for me to comment about what she had said. She agreed. I pointed out that while it is scary for her to open her mouth and share what she thought because she did not want the discomfort of someone either challenging her or disagreeing with what she had to say, the truth was that people of color have to live their lives in fear of being mistreated, oppressed, threatened, or even annihilated just for being themselves. I asked her if she could see the irony in that juxtaposition of realities. White people refuse to have conversations with people of color about how racism really affects their daily lives for fear of discomfort. People of color have to be subjected to mistreatment and the possibility of violence due to racism every day.
Deb Bussman, a professor at CSUMB, wrote a courageous and powerful essay titled, When the Killers Are White, White Violence, White Silence, that speaks to the reality and social impact of race being a public issue when crime is committed by a person of color and not being mentioned when crime is committed by a person who identifies as white. We have no time to share this essay, but Caroline will read its ending.
Following his reception of the Nobel Peace Prize for his work as an opponent of apartheid, South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu is quoted as saying, "Be nice to the whites. They need you to rediscover their humanity." While I don't believe it is the job of people of color to restore our humanity, I do believe Archbishop Tutu is exactly right in his naming of the damage done to white people under systems of racial oppression and injustice. And yes, it does take tremendous courage, humility, and strong-heartedness to truly face the violence done under white supremacy, the heartbreaking dehumanization of peoples that continue each and every day. But I know that it is possible. And I know that denial, acquiescence, and guilt, silence's equally paralyzing and deadly twin sister, are not our only options. Learning our history, all of our history, including the histories of oppression, but also the equally silenced narratives of white resistance, alliances, and cross-racial social justice coalitions, is critical, as is the speaking out against injustice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And I would argue that for whites, a first step in reclaiming our full humanity, in beginning rather than ending our lives, is found in the very breaking of silences that bind systems of oppression in place. I believe there is healing in the resistance, healing in the embracing of the old industrial workers of the world motto, "An injury to one is an injury to all." Healing that comes when we choose to live and act out of our own full humanity.
Standing up and speaking out about racism is necessary for change to occur. If we keep silent about the ways in which groups of people are dehumanized, the system remains in place. Compassion and forgiveness are critical, however, when examining our own behavior and the ways in which we have remained silent. When we are able to forgive ourselves and make new decisions about speaking up, we reduce the shame, guilt, and feelings of powerlessness that support the continuation of injustice.
There are layers and layers of intellectual, emotional, and spiritual work involved with wrestling with race and racism. I have worked through grief and anger that sometimes overwhelmed me. As I moved through despair, I then discovered another layer that contained shame about being white and participating in a system that has caused such profound suffering. When I slowed enough to feel the bodily discomfort of shame, I was able to transform it into forgiveness and compassion for myself. In moving through the pain that I had buried about racism, my anger, my shame, my grief, I have discovered a deep, warm, powerful place in myself, my humanity. It is within my own humanity that I find renewal and strength to continue to address racism in the different realms of my life.
Thank you, ladies. I'm sure a lot of questions are probably circulating in your minds. So when you came in, there were index cards passed out. So we're going to get to Q&A shortly. So if you have any questions, write them down on the card, and then I'll try to get to as many as I can as long as time permits. And so what you read was amazing. And so I would ask you, what takeaway would you want the audience to take away from just chapter 6 on silence?
Well, I think that speaking up is really important.
Mm-hmm.
When we are silent, we not only give other people permission to make up stories about what we're thinking and what we're feeling, we also don't make any difference in terms of change. And most of us have words that are there. We met yesterday, Caroline and I met yesterday with a group of people who are learning to be therapists. And one thing came up and they were all silent. And we could have made up any story about why they were silent, but when I went around and asked each one of them, I think there were 12, to say one word, just one word, they couldn't speak, one word about what's happening with you, the words were almost all emotional words. Okay. So it was not that they had nothing to say, it was that they were frozen with the emotion of what they had to say. So it's very important to break silence. Yeah.
And I would say we're not going to be able to move forward as effectively as we need to if we remain silent. And it's a really safe place to hide.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so what are some of the steps to like break the barrier of silence?
Well, we've done something with this book that I think is really useful. At least people are telling us that. There's a reader's guide at the back of the book. It has questions that we're very thoughtful about, and they are related. They're based on each chapter has a set of questions. And the questions are written in such a way that they can be used in groups, mixed racial groups, but they also are primarily aimed at white people reading, but they're also appropriate for people of color.
Sure.
So that's one really good way to begin to change, is to meet with one other person to talk about what your life has been like, or what your experiences are like, to just break silence in some way. And we have a guide for doing that. Yeah.
And then if you look at the entire piece, what would the takeaways be for, once a person read the whole book, what would you want them to take away from the book?
You want to speak to that? Yeah.
Well, my hope, and actually we're hearing some of this from some people, is they have taken it into smaller groups that they have in their lives, whether it's in their living rooms, whether it's in their book clubs. Ann and I did a presentation at a church, and the church decided to take the book as part of what it was going to work on for several months. So the whole congregation really wrestled with the content in the book. So I would say our biggest hope is that this book is not just read and then put on a shelf, but that it's really actively used to help with discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to move into Q&A. Looks like we have about 19 minutes. And so I'm going to allow
questions here.
A lot of great questions. So I'm going to allow the authors to pick out some questions, and hopefully we can get through most of them. If not, we'll figure out a way to get the answers to you.
Okay, we start with probably the least emotional one.
All right. So
easier to answer. How do we get a copy of Combined Destinies if we're not planning to buy a copy today? So you can go to Amazon.com. You can go to Barnes & Noble, and you can go to Potomac Books, who is the publisher of the book. It's also being sold in a couple of stores in the Monterey Peninsula, but it's easy to order.
Okay.
You just type the title and you'll get that.
And just FYI, the book is coming out in paperback. Potomac Books was purchased by the University of Nebraska Press, and so it's coming out in a paperback version in September. So that's just
September 15th. Thank you. Okay, you want to do a question?
Yes. So yes, I'm sorry about what my grandparents did. I'm empathetic to African Americans, but it's not all white's fault. Why are all of us blamed? My hope certainly that in reading this book, so I would hope that you might want to read the book, that this is not about blame. It really isn't. It's about taking a look at a system. I was born innocent. I will be the first one to tell you that. But I was born into a system. It predates all of us sitting in here. And it's a system that has privileged white people at the expense of people of color. So again, not our fault. And there's a training that I do that says it's not our fault. We have to accept responsibility. So to the extent that I can really figure out how I benefit from a system that has privileged me as a white person, I have to take responsibility for seeing if I can create access so that more people have rooms at tables, boardrooms, jobs. And as a white person, to work against that feeling of shame about being blamed, if in fact that's where I go.
Okay. How's the book been received? It's been received really well. We've done more than 30 presentations, and we've not initiated any of them. So it's being very well received, and it's being very well received by people of color as well as by the Caucasian community. So that answers that quickly. I think that to address somebody who's wanting to know how to have meaningful conversations about the impact of racist condition and racism, this is a really good beginning place. Actually, sharing this book with some people is a really good beginning place because of the questions at the end, because they lead you into meaningful conversation. You can't really examine any of those questions without having some conversation that has some meaning. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be a very easy thing. You want to read that one?
I just want to go back, if I can, to Tim's story. That a great place to start is in a relationship with someone that you know and being willing to take a risk that ultimately moves the relationship forward. So here's how do I begin to deal with my own emotions when they may include shame, guilt, or fear related to racist conditioning? To learn to be with them. I think that these emotions are so powerful and that we've been taught to kind of be scared of certain emotions. So to learn how to just be in the emotion, not to try to push it away, not to act it out. And then I would say again, it's why Anna and I do this work together, to be with someone that you love and that you know loves you, and to begin to take some risks around meandering around with what either you've done, not done, whatever the behavior that's caused those feelings. and to be open to whatever the feedback that comes back to you. Yeah.
And to know that you're not alone. The country's full of people with shame, guilt, and fear and scary things. And we are really, all of us, conditioned to kind of keep that under wraps and pretend like it doesn't exist and sort of perform over top. And what happens is it just gets bigger. Okay, and it may take us out with a heart attack or some other physical illness, but it doesn't go away just because we don't look at it. Sort of like having a boogeyman in the closet, you know, he's going to be there even if whether you open that door or not, and he will bring down the house eventually. So it's better to at least know it's there, I think. Why didn't you title the book Silence? Well, 2 reasons. One, because a book should have a verb in the title. So that's the easy answer. The other answer is that it is all about silence, but it's all about everything that's in the book. And we have to break the book up into chapters, and silence is just really one chapter. But it's about many things. And silence would be a good title, except it's not a verb.
But I'd like to just go back to Anne's epiphany when she was listening to Martin Luther King's speech. I think that the title is an important reminder of our shared humanity and that we are in it together, and that it goes back to Deb's piece, that a lot of us as white people don't know the histories of those of us who have really fought for social justice, the silenced narratives of some of the resistance. So it's, again, we're all in it together. It's important that we remember that.
Yeah, you want to look at that one?
Oh. How has the book been received? We have had overwhelmingly positive response from this book. And I would say that one of the outcomes of people reading it is their willingness to share their stories. So either they've written stories and sent it to us, or if in fact we run into them and they say they've just finished reading the book, there's often some sort of story that they want to share. I don't think that you can have 52 white people writing their stories without it stimulating memory, because we've all grown up, well, those of us who were born here, and if you're not born here, you're in it now, are living in this racialized society, so that each one of us has a story. I think what's been kind of surprising is that we're finding that people that we don't know are writing reviews. And I was doing some research one day. I work at a university, and someone from a diversity department at another university had written a review, and there it was floating around the internet. I thought, hey!
Did I want to add something to that? Oh, it's been well received by both the white community and the black community. And we had a very interesting experience on the East Coast. I mean, where one night we were in a woman's home, a Jewish woman's home, and she had invited lots of people to this gathering. I think there were 150 people there. And some of them were African American, but most of them were not. And then the next day, we were in Baltimore, Maryland, and we gave a presentation to 100 people, and 95 of them were African American, and 5 of them were white members of their families. You know, I bring my son-in-law, my wife, my whatever. Yeah, so the racial reception, the mixed racial reception, I guess the way to say that, has also been very, very positive. And people are telling their stories. When we have had presentations that have had enough time for people, audience, we've said, well, what questions do you have? And rather than verbalizing questions, many of them stand up and say, well, let me tell you. and people are just sort of spontaneously speaking out, which is wonderful.
You triggered a thought for me. I was watching the movie 42 with my 6-year-old boy, and he takes on a lot of his mom's complexion. And we were watching the movie, and he said, "Dad, if we lived during that time," he said, "you wouldn't have been able to play baseball, and I would have been able to play." And I was like, wow, because my skin's a little darker, and my son's skin is real light. And so for him to pick that up, like, Dad couldn't play, but I could play, I thought that was pretty powerful.
Oh, it's very powerful. It's an easy question. How do we get a copy of Combined Destinies if we're not going to buy one today? You can, did I answer that already?
You did.
Okay. Sorry. My head was still in your story. I was looking, actually, just that moment when I forgot that I'd done that, I was looking at your child and you and your wife in my mind.
Okay.
Do that. Yeah. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do 2 more.
Okay. You want to look at that? That's intriguing.
Has there been any positive impacts or events from your book that you hadn't expected or anticipated? So we've addressed that a little bit. I think the overwhelming, this is an important book. Thank you for writing it. We're glad these voices are out. I don't think that I expected it to be that well received. I think if I'm totally honest about that. So I think that I have been really, I'm grateful. I think the time is now, and I think that other people think that too. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question that's a very complicated question. I don't, but it's an interesting question. Is this hard work around diverse perspectives, experiences, traumas, the prerequisite for transforming organizational culture? If so, then how to overcome the resistance and the fear? I think asking the question is the way to begin. So whomever, I don't know who wrote this wonderful question. But yeah, I think you've begun already just by asking that question. And I think that, yes, I think hard work is yes. I think that the easy answer is yes. I think that overcoming resistance and fear takes some modeling. So if you're in a culture that is afraid, it takes courage. Sometimes it just takes one person being courageous enough to speak up or speak out or say, this is what's happening for me, without blame. Because blame is useless, really. I mean, it's sometimes convenient, it may be fun, but it's pretty useless in terms of a change strategy. But yes, I think it's really important. It's really hard. And it's hard work because we're all born into this system, and the system has impacted all of us, whether we wanted it to or not. And then we're put in these boxes, and we're supposed to relate out of the boxes. And we're human beings. We're not really objects, even though often we pretend like that we are. We really aren't. So there's a lot of emotional stuff going on underground. So I think, I would encourage organizations of any kind to provide space for looking at what's underneath a little bit, even though it may be really super threatening. I have seen organizations shift in positive ways as a consequence of that. Yeah, so really give you a lot of strokes for asking the question, actually.
You made an interesting remark about don't just read the book and then put it down. So what challenge would you give the audience as they leave this event today?
That's going to show up.
Yeah. For those of you who buy the book, I would, well, here, let me tell a story. I just saw a really good friend of mine from New York, and he had not read the book yet. So he took with him when he left a copy. And I said, here's what I really want. I certainly want you to read the book, but I want you to share this book with someone in your life as a way to continue the conversation. So that would be one thing people could do.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we have a couple questions we want to leave the audience
There
with.
we go. How have you learned to keep quiet rather than speaking up is a good thing to reflect on. What prevents you from speaking out against social oppression when you see it or when you experience it?
And what is social oppression?
And what is social oppression?
Yes.
I wanted to read, where's the little piece? I had a little thing I wanted to read you about social oppression. Actually, I can actually speak to it. I guess we don't. Social oppression is a system that keeps a certain group in a society down, briefly. Social oppression is a way of maneuvering life so that certain members of a society are not able to come up. It puts them down. And all of us are probably aware of it in our own lives if we think back to our childhood, because maybe not all, but most people felt oppressed as children. Like they weren't free because adults wanted them to behave in certain ways or had days when they felt like that. But there are certain groups in our society that are oppressed all the time. And it is a system that affects everybody, in not only those people in that group, but everybody outside of the group. So that's
good.
Kind of, is that a good enough description?
That works.
Okay.
Can I just add a
Sure.
piece?
Great, Caroline.
So when we're talking about racism as a form of social oppression, one of the things that white people really have to wrestle with is being able to see the system, because we've been conditioned not to see it and not to recognize how we participate in it. And we've also been taught that we're individuals. And while I'm sitting here as an individual, we're participating in a system that has benefited us. But I'd say one of the first steps is you have to really be able to see it.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good. So I want to first thank the audience for the great questions that you brought forth. And then I also want to give a round of applause for our panelists today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back to you, Tim.
TV show?
Yep. We're filming, right?
So, am I on again? Or am I good? I know when I speak up, that's what always happens. Voice activated, I'm telling you. For one, I echo that, thanking you. Also, Tom, I want to thank you for moderating today, your life experience along with everything else. For this subject matter, especially for people of color, it's a very emotional subject. You know, anytime something's mentioned in this area, I think most people here have some type of emotion that's tied to it. And that's not saying for non-people of color it's not, but I just know there's a real sensitivity associated with it. And it's great that we're able to open the dialogue of discussion. Now I think everything went well, so I'd like to acknowledge the SAALN members who are here. If you could stand up. Thank you so much, because it's not just about today. Their work that they do is throughout the year. Through their tenureship at Safeway, they're always looking for ways to make the situation better for all of us, not just for our group, but for the company at the same time. I'd like to especially point out my vice chair today, because the first thought of coming together with this presentation was brought to us by my vice chair, Melba Dangerfield. So it was through Melba's vision and us sitting around looking at each other. Are we going to get in trouble for this? Is this going to work? So we went to Kelly, our executive sponsor. So thank you, Kelly. And Kelly said, go for it. I think we can do this. So thank you, Kelly, as well. So very last piece, someone did ask a question along the way of where can I get a book if I'm not going to buy one today? Well, I think we have a handful of books that are available. And I think I did have Jennifer Johnson was going to come down but you're not mic'd up, so I'm going to have to just take this part. Somewhere underneath some of the seats, there's a little card that says you're a winner or something to that effect. If you see one of those near a seat near you or an aisle near you, the book is yours.
Check the chairs
Oh,
around.
it's on the armrest. I'm sorry. On the black armrest, pull that up. There should be a number.
That's cool. What a great idea.
Maybe under a chair they're not sitting in. Huh?
I'd go look at all the chairs around me.
Yeah.
All right, there's a winner. I found a winner.
Yay! Come on down.
So after all of the winners are found, what's going to happen?